Let me go!
You're a thief!
I didn't do it!
3 years ago, they dragged Praskovya Vetrova out of the winter ball barefoot, her white silk gown torn at the shoulder, while the whole of Petersburg whispered the word thief. Tonight, she walked back through those same gilded doors in crimson, head high, a small velvet box clenched in her gloved hand. The orchestra stopped. Glasses froze mid-air, and at the top of the marble staircase, Count Yaropolk Sheremetyev turned pale as snow. "You," he breathed.
You were supposed to be dead!
I know, my love. That was your plan, wasn't it?
But what was inside that little velvet box? Who really lied about her 3 years ago? And why did the Count want her buried so badly? And the man standing silent behind him, the one whose eyes never left her face, does he remember the promise he made her the night before she was cast out? If you want to know how Praskovya tears this empire of liars to the ground, subscribe to the channel right now, hit that bell, and let me know in the comments. Would you have walked back in? 3 years before she walked back into that ballroom in crimson, Praskovya Vetrova was the quietest girl in Petersburg. People who saw her then would never have believed she could frighten a man like Count Yaropolk Sheremetyev. She was small, soft-spoken, the kind of girl who lowered her eyes when older women passed her in the corridors of the Winter Palace. Her father, Lord Miroslav Vetrov, was a minor noble from the cold edge of the Novgorod province, a man with more pride than coin, and Praskovya had been raised on bread, books, and a strict belief that a lady never raised her voice, no matter how loud the world became around her. She lived in a narrow blue house on the Moika embankment with her father and her younger sister, Elizaveta. Their mother had died of fever the winter Praskovya turned 12. And since that day, Praskovya had been the one to braid Elizaveta's hair, to mend the torn hems, to slip extra sugar into her father's tea when his hands shook from the cold. She was 19 now, almost 20, and the Petersburg season had begun. It was at her very first ball that she met him. Count Yaropolk Sheremetyev was tall, golden-haired, and laughed too easily for a man so rich. He had a way of looking at a woman that made her feel chosen, even in a room of 200. When he asked Praskovya to dance, she could feel every eye in the room turn toward her, and her cheeks burned so hotly she was sure she would faint right there on the polished floor. He whispered to her as they turned, "You dance as if you were afraid of the ground, Lady Vetrova." "I have never danced with a count before," she answered, and her voice was so small she barely heard it herself. He smiled. "Then I shall ruin every other partner for you." She believed him. God help her, she believed every word. In the weeks that followed, the Count called on her almost daily. He sent white roses to the little blue house. He sat in her father's shabby parlor and drank weak tea without complaint. He told Lord Vetrov that he had never met a girl so pure of heart, so untouched by the cruelty of court, and her father wept that night into his hands, because for the first time in years, he believed his daughters might be safe. But there were small things that Praskovya noticed and pushed away. The way the Count's smile did not always reach his eyes. The way his cousin, the dark-eyed Lieutenant Radomir Tarasov, would stare at her across crowded rooms as if he wanted to say something and could not. The way Yaropolk's mother, the old countess, called her the little sparrow and patted her cheek in a way that felt more like measuring than affection. One evening, near the end of autumn, Praskovya was walking through the gardens of the Sheremetyev estate when she overheard two servants arguing behind the hedges. "It is not right, what he asks of us," one whispered. "The girl knows nothing." "Quiet," the other hissed. Do you want to end up like the last one? Praskovya stood very still. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure they would hear it. She wanted to step out. She wanted to ask. But she was a well-bred girl, and well-bred girls did not eavesdrop, and well-bred girls did not accuse counts of anything, ever. So she walked away. She told herself she had misheard. She told herself the servants gossiped about everything. That night, Lieutenant Radomir Tarasov found her alone on the balcony. He was not smiling. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, very softly, "Lady Vetrova, if a man ever tells you to trust him completely, run." She laughed because she did not know what else to do. "You are teasing me, Lieutenant." "I am not teasing you," he said, and then he bowed, and he left her there, with a cold wind pulling at her hair and a small, sharp feeling in her chest that she could not name. 2 weeks later, the winter ball began. 2 weeks later, a sapphire necklace belonging to the Empress herself would be found in Praskovya Vetrova's reticule, and her life, as she knew it, would end. But on that balcony, with Radomir's warning still echoing in her ears, she did not yet know any of it. She only knew that something was wrong, and she did not know who to tell. What had Radomir seen that she had not? Who was the last one the servants had whispered about? And why, on the morning of the winter ball, did her own sister Yelizaveta refuse to look her in the eye? The morning of the winter ball, Petersburg was buried in fresh snow. Praskovya woke before dawn. She had not slept well. Radomir's warning sat in her chest like a small cold stone, and every time she closed her eyes, she heard the servants whispering behind the hedges. She told herself again that she was being foolish. Tonight, she would dance with Yaropolk in front of the entire court. Tonight, perhaps, he would speak to her father about marriage. Tonight, her life would begin. She found Yelizaveta in the kitchen, already dressed, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she was not drinking. Her sister was 16, slender, with the same dark hair as Praskovya, but lighter eyes, the color of weak honey. She did not look up when Praskovya entered. "Liza," Praskovya said softly, "you are awake early." I could not sleep. Neither could I. Praskovya sat down across from her. She reached for her sister's hand, and Yelizaveta pulled it away. It was such a small movement. So small, but it struck Praskovya like a slap. "Liza, what is wrong?" "Nothing." Her sister still would not look at her. "I am only tired. Look at me." Yelizaveta lifted her eyes for 1 second. They were red-rimmed. Then she stood, the chair scraping loudly against the stone floor, and she walked out of the kitchen without another word. Praskovya sat alone for a long time. She told herself it was nerves. Liza had always been moody, always quick to tears. The ball was tonight, and perhaps her sister was jealous, or afraid, or simply unwell. She told herself 100 small comforting things, and she believed none of them. By the time the carriage came for them at sunset, Yelizaveta had locked herself in her room and refused to come down. Lord Vetrov was furious. Praskovya told him quietly that her sister was ill and that they should not press her. Her father grumbled all the way to the palace, but Praskovya barely heard him. She kept thinking of the way Liza had pulled her hand away. The winter ball was held in the great hall of the Sheremetyev Palace, not the imperial one, and every noble family in the city had been invited. The chandeliers blazed. The orchestra played a slow waltz as Praskovya entered on her father's arm, and for a moment the whole room seemed to pause and look at her. She was wearing white silk, simple, with small pearls at the throat. She had no jewels. She had no fortune. She had only the way she carried herself, small and quiet and clean, and she saw Yaropolk smile at her from across the room as if she were the only woman alive. He came to her at once. He kissed her hand. He led her to the floor. "You are pale, my sparrow," he murmured as they danced. "I am only tired." "Tonight is important," he said. His grip on her waist tightened, just slightly. "Promise me, you will not leave my side. I promise." He smiled, and again his smile did not reach his eyes. Across the room, leaning against a marble column, Lieutenant Radomir Tarasov was watching her. He did not smile. He did not move. He only watched, and his face was the face of a man who was about to witness something terrible and could not stop it. It happened just after the second waltz. There was a sudden cry from near the orchestra. A woman screamed, then another. The music stopped raggedly, one instrument at a time, until the great hall was filled with nothing but voices, rising in confusion. The Empress's lady-in-waiting, the Grand Duchess Anastasia herself, was clutching her throat. "My necklace!" she gasped. "The sapphire! It is gone." The hall went silent. Praskovya did not understand at first. She turned to Yaropolk, smiling, almost to laugh at the chaos of it. But Yaropolk was no longer looking at her. He was looking at her reticule, the small white silk bag that hung from her wrist. "My love," he said gently. "What is in your bag?" "Nothing," she said. "Only my fan and a handkerchief. Then you will not mind opening it." The crowd was turning. The whispers were beginning. Praskovya's hands shook as she loosened the silk cord. She opened the reticule. She looked inside. The sapphire necklace of the Empress lay coiled at the bottom of her bag like a sleeping snake. She heard herself make a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound an animal makes when it is struck. She looked up at Yaropolk, and the look on his face was not shock. It was not horror. It was satisfaction, hidden beneath a thin and trembling mask of concern. And in that single moment, she understood everything. "Yaropolk," she whispered. He stepped back from her. He said, loudly, so the whole hall could hear, "Praskovya, how could you?" Hands seized her arms. Someone tore the pearls from her throat. Someone else ripped the shoulder of her gown so the white silk hung loose against her skin. The Countess Sheremetyeva was weeping theatrically into a handkerchief. Lord Vetrov, her own father, was being held back by two officers, his face gray with disbelief. "I did not do this," Praskovya said. Her voice was small. Nobody heard her. "I did not do this. I did not." They dragged her through the ballroom. Her slippers came off on the marble floor. The whispers were shouts now. "Thief! Thief! Thief!" And then, as they pulled her past the marble column, she saw Radomir Tarasov. He had not moved. He was still standing exactly where he had been. But his hand was clenched so tightly around the column's edge that his knuckles were white, and his eyes, his dark and terrible eyes, were fixed on Yaropolk with a hatred so deep that Praskovya almost stopped breathing. He knew. He had known all along, and he had not warned her clearly enough to save her. They threw her out into the snow barefoot. The great doors of the Sheremetyev palace slammed shut behind her. She stood in the courtyard, shivering, the torn silk of her gown soaking in the wet snow, and somewhere far above her, in a high window, a small figure with weak honey eyes was watching her and crying. Yelizaveta, her own sister, watching her be destroyed. But why? Why would Liza let this happen? And what had Yaropolk truly wanted from her? A girl with no fortune, no jewels, nothing to give. Who had placed that necklace in her bag, and on whose orders? And the look in Radomir's eyes, that black and burning hatred. What did he know that he had not been able to say? They did not take her to prison. Yarpok was too clever for that. A trial would mean witnesses, and witnesses could be questioned. Instead, by morning, the Sheremetyev family had arranged everything quietly. Praskovya Vetrova was stripped of her name at court. Her father was told that if he ever spoke of the matter, his younger daughter would be ruined too. And Praskovya herself was placed in a sledge at dawn and driven north, away from Petersburg, away from everyone she had ever known, into the white silence of the Novgorod forests. They left her at a tiny village called Tikhaya Sloboda. 2 streets, a wooden church, and a frozen river. The driver did not even wait to see her walk through the snow to the cottage that had been arranged for her. He turned the sledge around and was gone before she had reached the door. The cottage belonged to an old woman named Glafira Antonovna, a widow who had once been a midwife in the city and who asked no questions when Praskovya arrived shaking on her doorstep in a borrowed gray wool dress, with no luggage and no story she could bear to tell. "Sit by the fire, child," Glafira said. That was all. She poured her hot kvass. She put a thick shawl around her shoulders, and for 3 days, Praskovya did not speak. She did not cry. She only sat by the fire and stared into it, and Glafira let her. On the 4th day, Praskovya spoke. "They said I stole." "I know," the old woman said. "How?" "News travels, even here. And I can see a guilty girl. You are not one." Praskovya looked up at her, and something inside her chest cracked open, and for the first time since the ball, she wept. She wept until she could not breathe, until her ribs ached, until Glafira held her like a child and rocked her by the fire. When she was done, she was different. Something in her had burned away. The soft, quiet, well-bred girl who had lowered her eyes in the corridors of the Winter Palace was gone, and in her place was something harder and colder and very quiet. "Glafira Antonovna," she said, "I want you to teach me everything you know." "About what, child?" "About medicines, about herbs, about how to listen to a heartbeat, about how to deliver a baby, about how to know when a man is lying by the color of his face." She paused. "About how to survive." The old woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. The winter passed. Then the spring. Then another winter. Praskovya learned. She learned which roots cleaned a wound and which ones killed slowly. She learned how to set a broken bone, how to calm a fevered child, how to look at a man's hands and know whether he had lied to his wife that morning. She learned to ride a horse astride, in trousers, because in a village like Tikhaya Sloboda, nobody cared about scandal. She learned to chop wood until her shoulders ached, and then chop more. She also learned silence. She learned to wait. In the second spring, a letter found its way to her, not from her father, who had not written once, but from a name she did not at first recognize. R. Tarasov. Her hands shook so badly she could barely break the seal. She did not read the words to anyone. She read them 3 times alone, by the fire, and then she put the page into the flames and watched it burn. Whatever Radomir had told her, it had changed something in her face. Glafira saw it and did not ask. "You're leaving soon," the old woman said that night. "Not yet, but soon." "What did the letter say, child?" Praskovya looked at her across the firelight. Her eyes were dry now. They had been dry for a long time. It said that my sister Yelizaveta is to marry Count Yaropolk Sheremetyev in the spring. Glafira drew in a slow breath. Ah, and it said other things. Praskovya's voice was very even. It said that the necklace was never lost. It said that the Grand Duchess Anastasia was paid to scream. It said that there were 3 people in Petersburg who placed that sapphire in my reticule, and that one of them was in my own family. Your father? No. Praskovya's hands closed slowly in her lap. No, not my father. She did not say the name. She could not, yet. To say it aloud was to make it real. And if it was real, then everything she had believed about her own childhood, about the small braided girl whose hair she had tied every morning, was a lie. That night she could not sleep. She walked out into the snow without a coat. She stood under the black sky, and she felt the cold burn her skin, and she did not move. She thought of Yelizaveta in the kitchen, pulling her hand away. She thought of Yelizaveta in the high window, watching her be dragged barefoot into the snow. She thought of how many small moments in their life together must have been lies, and she could not count them. But she also thought of Radomir. Why had he written? Why now, 2 years late, when she could do nothing? Was it guilt? Was it warning? Was it a trap? She did not trust him. She did not trust anyone. But she knew, standing there in the snow, with her bare hands going white, that she was no longer the girl they had thrown away. She had been hollowed out and refilled, and what filled her now was not soft. In the morning, she went to Glafira and she said, "Teach me how a woman walks into a room and is not afraid." The old woman smiled for the first time in months. "That, child, I cannot teach you, but I can tell you this. Fear is a horse. You either ride it or it rides you. Choose." Praskovya chose. By the 3rd summer, she was ready. She had money saved from her work with the village women. She had a name nobody in Petersburg would recognize. She had a small velvet box she had been preparing for almost a year, and she had not yet opened it for anyone, not even Glafira. But why had Radomir warned her now? Was Yelizaveta truly a willing bride, or another piece in Yaropolk's game? And what, after 3 long winters in the forest, had Praskovya put inside that little velvet box, that she would carry it all the way back to the winter ball? She arrived in Petersburg on a Tuesday, in a black traveling cloak, with hair pulled back severely and a face nobody recognized. 3 winters had changed her. The softness was gone from her cheeks. Her hands were no longer the hands of a girl who had only ever held a fan. She took rooms above a glovemaker's shop on the Fontanka, paid 3 months in advance in silver, and gave her name as Madame Zinaida Volkova, a widow from Riga. For 2 weeks, she did nothing but watch. She watched the Sheremetyev palace from across the canal at dusk. She watched Yaropolk ride out in the mornings on a black horse, laughing with friends. She watched the Grand Duchess Anastasia, older now, thinner, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped from her carriage. And she watched her sister. Yelizaveta was 19. She wore pale blue and rode in the Sheremetyev carriage with the old countess beside her. She did not look happy. She did not look unhappy. She looked like a girl who had been told what her face should do and had practiced it until it was the only face she had left. Praskovya watched her and felt nothing, or almost nothing. A small, dull ache somewhere behind her ribs that she did not let herself name. On the 15th night, she sent a single note to a single address, no signature. 3 words. I am here. Radomir came within the hour. She opened the door to him without speaking. He stood in the dim hallway in his officer's coat, taller than she remembered, his dark eyes hollow, as if he had not slept in weeks. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Praskovya, Lieutenant, you should not have come back. I should have come back 2 years ago. He stepped inside. She closed the door. They stood in her small candlelit parlor, two strangers who had once stood on a balcony together, and she did not offer him a seat. Why did you write to me? She asked. Because I could not live with it anymore. With what? He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time, and then he said, very quietly, with watching them turn your sister into the next you. Praskovya did not move. He does not love her, Praskovya. He never loved you either. He needs a wife from a family with no power, no influence, no one to ask questions when she disappears. Your father has signed everything. Yelizaveta is to inherit a small estate near Tver from a distant aunt next spring. The day after the wedding, that estate becomes Yaropolk's. And a month after that, Yelizaveta will fall from a horse, or drown in a lake, or die in childbirth, and he will be a grieving widower with a new fortune, free to marry again. He did the same to someone before me. Yes, a girl from Pskov. Her name was Vasa. She died in the Neva 2 winters before you came to court. Praskovya closed her eyes. She thought of the servants behind the hedge. Do you want to end up like the last one? Why did you not stop him? Because he is my cousin, and because I am a coward, and because I told myself it was not my business. His voice broke for the first time. Because I loved you, and I said nothing, and I will carry that to my grave. She opened her eyes. She looked at him steadily. Then help me now. The winter ball that year fell on the last night of January. Praskovya did not arrive with the others. She waited until the hall was full, until the orchestra had begun the second waltz, until Yaropolk had taken Yelizaveta onto the floor in front of the entire court. Then she stepped out of her black carriage in a crimson silk gown, with a small velvet box clenched in her gloved hand, and she walked alone up the marble steps of the Sheremetyev Palace. The footman did not stop her. Radomir had seen to that. She paused at the great doors. For one heartbeat, she was 19 again, barefoot in the snow, hearing the word thief echoing behind her. For one heartbeat, she almost turned back. She thought of Glafira by the fire. Fear is a horse. Ride it, or it rides you. She rode it. She opened the doors. The orchestra stopped. Glasses froze mid-air. Yaropolk turned pale as snow. You, he breathed. You were supposed to be dead, she smiled. I know, my love. That was the plan, wasn't it? She walked down the center of the hall. 200 faces turned with her. Yelizaveta let go of Yaropolk's hand and stepped back, one hand pressed to her mouth. The old Countess Sheremetyeва rose from her chair, her face the color of ash. Praskovya stopped at the foot of the marble staircase. She lifted the small velvet box. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of black silk, lay the sapphire necklace of the Empress, the real one, with a small folded paper beneath it, sealed in red wax with the Sheremetyev crest. The hall made a sound like a single drawn breath. 3 years ago, Praskovya said, and her voice carried, clear and cold, to every corner of the room. This necklace was placed in my reticule by a man who has been stealing from this court for 10 years. Tonight, I have brought it home, and I have brought something else with it. She lifted the folded paper. Shall I read it aloud, Yaropolk? Or would you prefer to confess first? But what was on that paper, sealed with his own family's crest, Would Yaropolk fight, or would he run? Ending the silent hall, as Yelizaveta stared at her sister with tears streaming down her face. Would Praskovya truly be able to destroy the man who had destroyed her without destroying the only sister she had left? Yaropolk moved before she could read a word. He came down the staircase fast, 2 steps at a time, his face no longer pale but red and shaking, and his hand was already inside his coat. Praskovya saw the small flash of steel before anyone else in the hall. She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply lifted the folded paper a little higher, so that every face in the room could see the red wax crest. Yaropolk Sheremetyev, she said, if you draw that knife in front of 200 witnesses, you will hang before morning. He froze, 3 steps above her. Behind him, on the upper landing, Radomir Tarasov stepped quietly out of the shadows, with 4 officers of the Imperial Guard. He had been waiting. He had been waiting all evening. Yaropolk turned his head and saw them, and the color drained from his face for the 2nd time that night. "Cousin," Radomir said softly. "Come down, slowly." The hall did not breathe. The old Countess Sheremetyeva sank back into her chair, as if her legs had given way. Lord Vetrov, Praskovya's father, was standing near the orchestra, white-haired now, white-faced, both his hands pressed against his mouth, like a man watching a house burn down. Praskovya did not look at her father, not yet. She turned to the assembled court. She held the paper high. "This is a letter," she said, in Count Sheremetyev's own hand, written 11 years ago to a jeweler in Vienna. In it, he confesses to the theft of 3 pieces of imperial jewelry and arranges to have them recut and sold abroad. The Vienna jeweler kept it as insurance. He died last year. His widow sold it to me for the price of a small house. She paused. There was also a girl named Vasa Litvinova, from Puskov. She drowned in the Neva 2 winters before the necklace was placed in my bag. Her family was told it was an accident. It was not. I have a witness who saw her pushed. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman cried out and was hushed. And there is my own case, Praskovya said. Her voice was very even now. The Grand Duchess Anastasia was paid 4,000 rubles to scream when she did. I have her signed account, written 6 months ago, when she fell ill and feared judgment. The necklace was placed in my reticule by the Countess Sheremetyeva herself, during the 2nd waltz. I have a maid who saw it done. She lowered the paper. She looked at Yaropolk. You have ruined 3 women that I know of, and I suspect more. Tonight, you ruin no one else. He lunged at her then. He was fast. The knife came out of his coat in a single fluid motion, and the crowd screamed, and Praskovya, who had spent 2 winters learning to ride astride and to chop wood until her shoulders ached, simply stepped aside and let him fall past her down the last 3 steps onto the marble floor. The officers were on him before he could rise. Radomir came down the stairs slowly, his face like stone, and he did not look at his cousin as the guards lifted him to his feet and bound his hands. The old countess began to wail. 2 ladies in waiting carried her from the hall. Yelizaveta had not moved. She was standing where Yaropolk had left her on the dance floor, her pale blue gown shaking around her, her honey eyes huge in her white face. She was looking at her sister. Praskovya looked back at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Yelizaveta took 1 small step forward. "Prasha," she whispered. It was the name she had called her sister when she was very small. "Prasha, I did not know. I swear before God, I did not know what they had done to you. I only knew father said I had to marry him. I only knew if I refused, we would lose everything. I was 16. I was 16, and you were gone, and they told me you had run away to shame us." Praskovya did not move. "I watched them throw you in the snow," Yelizaveta said, and her voice broke. "I watched from the window. They told me you had asked for it. They told me you had betrayed our family. I believed them. I believed them because I was a child, and because I was afraid, and because I wanted father to be proud of me for once. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I have hated myself every day since." Praskovya felt the dull ache behind her ribs sharpen suddenly into something almost unbearable. She thought of the little girl whose hair she had braided. She thought of the small hand pulling away in the kitchen. She had come back to Petersburg ready to lose her sister. She had told herself she did not care. She had told herself there was nothing left to save. She had been lying to herself. She walked across the marble floor. The crowd parted around her. She stopped in front of Yelizaveta, and for a moment, she only looked at her, this tall, thin, frightened girl, who was not the child she remembered, and not yet the woman she might become. Then she took her sister's hand. Yelizaveta made a sound that was almost a sob. "You are coming with me," Praskovya said quietly. "Tonight, you will never set foot in this house again. Father will answer for his own choices." She turned, still holding Yelizaveta's hand, and she walked back down the length of the great hall. The 200 faces did not whisper now. They watched in silence. She did not look at any of them. At the great doors, Radomir was waiting. He did not speak. He only opened the door for her, and his dark eyes were full of something she could not yet name and did not yet have the strength to answer. "Lieutenant," she said, "Madame Vetrova, thank you. Do not thank me. I owe you a debt I will spend the rest of my life trying to pay." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very softly, "Then come and find me in the spring. When the river thaws, we will see what kind of man you have become by then." She stepped out into the snow with her sister beside her. Yaropolk Sheremetyev was tried within the month. The letter, the maid, the Grand Duchess's signed account, and the testimony of a stable hand from Pskov, who had finally found the courage to speak, were enough to condemn him. He was stripped of his title, his estates were forfeit to the crown, and he was sent to a fortress in the far north, where he died of fever 2 winters later, alone, in a cell that did not even have a window. The old countess survived him by 6 months. Her estates went to a distant cousin who had nothing to do with any of it. Lord Vetrov went into the country and did not return to Petersburg. Praskovya wrote to him twice. He did not write back. She did not write a third time. Yelizaveta lived with Praskovya for 2 years in the small house Praskovya bought on the Fontanka. She was quiet for a long time. Slowly, she learned to laugh again. She married, eventually, a kind young doctor with no fortune and a great deal of patience, and Praskovya stood beside her at the altar in a dress of pale green silk and did not cry until afterwards. Glafira Antonovna came down from Tikaya Sloboda to live with them in her last years. She died in the small house by the canal, in a bed by the window, holding Praskovya's hand. And Radomir? Radomir came in the spring. He came every spring after that. It took him 3 of them before Praskovya let him in past the parlor. It took 2 more before she let him stay. But she did, in the end, because she had learned, somewhere between the snow of Tikaya Sloboda and the marble of the Sheremetyev Palace, that a woman who has ridden her own fear all the way home can also choose, when she is ready, to be loved. She had walked into that ballroom in crimson to destroy a man. She had walked out of it holding her sister's hand, and in the end, that was the proof she had truly come back to deliver. Not the necklace, not the letter, but the simple, terrible, beautiful fact that they had tried to bury her, and she had grown roots instead. My loves, that is the story of Praskovya Vetrova. If she made you feel something tonight, please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me which moment broke your heart the most. The kitchen, the snow, or the staircase. A brand new story is dropping very soon, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. 5 years passed in the small house on the Fontanka. Praskovya was 27 now. She wore dark green and dark blue, and her hair was always braided simply, the way Glafira had taught her. She kept a small practice as a midwife and a healer. The women of the Fontanka came to her with their fevered children and their bruised wrists and their secrets, and she listened to all of them the way Glafira had once listened to her, without questions, without judgment, without ever telling another living soul. She had become, without meaning to, the quiet center of a small neighborhood that nobody at court would have noticed at all. Radomir was her husband now. He had left the Imperial Guard the year they married. He worked as a steward for a kind old prince who trusted him completely, and he came home every evening at the same hour, and he took off his boots at the door, and he kissed the top of her head before he sat down by the fire. He was not the same man who had stood frozen against that marble column 3 years ago. He had grown quieter, steadier. He still woke sometimes in the night with his hands shaking, and Praskovya would hold him until his breathing slowed, and she never asked him what he had dreamed about. She knew. They had a daughter. Her name was Glasha. after Glafira, and she was 3 years old, and she had her father's dark eyes, and her mother's stubborn small chin, and she was the loudest child on the entire Fontanka embankment. Praskovya watched her run barefoot through the parlor with her hair flying loose, and could not always believe she was real. Yelizaveta lived 2 streets away with her doctor husband. She had a son now, a fat laughing baby named Misha, and she came every Thursday for tea with the baby on her hip. The sisters did not speak of the past anymore. They had spoken of it enough, in the first long year, in tears, and in silences, and in slow, careful sentences across the kitchen table. Now they spoke of small things. Bread. Whether Glasha was eating enough. It was. Praskovya had come to understand what healing actually looked like. Not a single grand forgiveness, just 1,000 small Thursdays. It was on one such Thursday, in late October, that the letter came. The maid brought it in on a silver tray. Praskovya was bouncing Misha on her knee, while Yelizaveta poured tea, and she did not at first look at the letter. When she did, she stopped moving. The seal was the Sheremetyev crest. Yelizaveta saw her face change. "Prasha, what is it?" "I do not know." She broke the seal with hands that, to her own surprise, did not shake. The letter was short. It was written in a careful, old-fashioned hand by a notary in Vienna. It informed Madame Praskovya Tarasova, formerly Vetrova, that the matter of the estate of one Vasa Litvinova of Pskov, deceased, had at last been settled. The girl had left behind a son. The son had been raised quietly in a convent school in Galicia by the nuns who had taken him in when his mother was murdered. He was 12 years old now. His name was Casimir, and he had, according to papers the notary had only recently uncovered, a legal claim against the Sheremetyev estate that had been seized by the crown 5 years ago because his mother had been secretly married to Count Yaropolk Sheremetyev 1 month before her death. Praskovya put the letter down. She looked at her sister. Vasa had a son. What? Yaropolk's son. He is alive. He has been alive the whole time, in a convent school in the mountains. The 2 sisters sat in silence. The baby on Praskovya's knee gurgled and reached for her braid. "Prasha," Yelizaveta said slowly. "He is 12. He has nobody. I know. He is the son of the man who tried to kill you. I know. What will you do?" Praskovya looked down at Misha. She looked at Glasha, asleep now on the rug by the fire with her small fist pressed to her cheek. She thought of a 12-year-old boy in a stone convent on a Galician mountain who had been told that his mother had drowned by accident and who did not know that anyone in the world remembered his name. "I will go and get him," she said. Yelizaveta closed her eyes. Then she opened them and said, "Of course you will." Radomir came home that evening to find his wife packing a small traveling trunk. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her for a long moment without speaking. He knew her by now. He did not need to ask whether the decision had already been made. He only needed to ask where they were going. "Galicia," she said. "There is a boy." He sat down on the edge of the bed. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "He will look like Yaropolk, perhaps." "Praskovya, are you sure?" She came and sat beside him. She took his hand. She had grown very good, over 5 years, at taking his hand at the right moments. "Radomir," she said, "when they threw me in the snow, there was a small figure in a high window who could have screamed for me and did not. She was 16. She was afraid. She has spent the rest of her life trying to make it right, and I have forgiven her, because she was a child, and because nobody had taught her how to be brave yet." She paused. "There is a boy in a convent in Galicia who is 12. Nobody has taught him anything yet. If we leave him there, he will grow up not knowing who he is, and someone, eventually, will tell him in the cruelest possible way. I would rather it be us. I would rather it be a kitchen on the Fontanka, with bread and tea, and his Aunt Yelizaveta, and a small loud cousin who will not leave him alone." She smiled faintly. "He is Glasha's cousin too, you know. By blood." Radomir was quiet for a long time. Then he lifted her hand and pressed it to his mouth. "I will book the carriage in the morning." They traveled through the first snow of November. They found the convent on the 3rd week, high in a valley where the air was thin and the bells rang 4 times a day. The Mother Superior was a small, sharp woman who looked at Praskovya's papers for a long time without speaking. Then she sent for the boy. Casimir came into the cold stone parlor in a gray wool robe, 2 sizes too large for him. He was thin. He had Yaropolk's golden hair, and Vasa's, the nun said, soft brown eyes. He stood in the doorway and looked at Praskovya, and Praskovya looked at him, and for a single terrible moment she saw the Count on the marble staircase, and her breath caught in her chest. Then the boy spoke. "Are you my mother's friend?" he asked. His voice was very small. "Sister Agnesa said somebody who knew my mother had come." Praskovya knelt down on the cold stone floor so that her face was level with his. "No, my love," she said softly. "I did not know your mother. I am very sorry. But I knew the man who hurt her, and I came here so that you would never have to be alone with what he did again." The boy's chin trembled. He did not cry. He stood very straight, the way a child stands when he has learned that crying brings nothing. "Are you taking me away?" "Only if you want to come." He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Radomir, standing quietly by the door in his traveling coat. Then he looked back at her. "Will there be bread?" Praskovya did not laugh. She did not cry. She only nodded, and she held out her hand, and after a moment, the boy took it. They came home in the first week of December. Glasha was sleeping when they walked through the door, and Casimir stood very still in the parlor with his small bundle of belongings in his arms, looking at the fire as if he had never seen one in a private house before. Yelizaveta came the next morning with Misha and a basket of pirozhki, and she did not ask the boy a single question. She only kissed his forehead and put a warm roll in his hand and said, "You look like you have had a very long journey. Come and sit by the fire." The boy did not speak much that winter, but by the spring, he was running through the parlor after Glasha, and by the summer, Praskovya heard him laugh for the first time, and she had to leave the kitchen and stand in the small back garden by herself for several minutes before she could come back inside. She stood there, in the soft Petersburg sunlight, and she thought of the girl who had been dragged barefoot through the snow 8 years ago. She thought of the girl who had stood in the snow outside Glafira's cottage, with her bare hands going white, learning how to choose. She thought of the woman in crimson on the marble staircase. She thought of the woman she was now, in a faded apron, with flour on her hands, listening to 2 children laugh in her parlor. They had banished her over a lie. She had come back with proof. But the proof, in the end, had not been the necklace, or the letter, or even the truth about Yaropolk. The proof had been this: a small house, a kind man, a sister at the door on Thursdays, a daughter with a stubborn chin, a boy who had finally learned how to laugh. She had grown roots, and nothing, now, would ever uproot her again. My loves, that is the end of Praskovya Vetrova's story. Thank you truly, from the bottom of my heart, for staying with her all the way to the last page. If she made you feel something, if you cried in the snow with her, or smiled in that small kitchen at the end, please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this again. Tell me in the comments, which character did you love the most? Was it Glafira by the fire? Was it Radomir at the marble column? Was it little Casimir in his too big robe? And what kind of story would you like me to tell you next? A forbidden love? A revenge in Venice? A queen with a secret? I am listening. I am always listening. And I will see you very, very soon in the next story.